So, have you ever actually wondered if your deepest personality traits, your, sudden emotional shifts and primal needs are truly written in the stars? Or is it all entirely shaped by our biology? Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into this fascinating journey, looking at the sky above and the brain within. And honestly, as we'll see, they might just be speaking the exact same language.
Let's just jump right into this massive paradox. On one side, we've got ancient astrological mysticism. We're talking about a system thousands of years old that says the exact position of celestial bodies at your birth dictates your fate. On the other side, the cutting-edge modern medical science of chronobiology. This studies how environmental rhythms, like the literal amount of light you were exposed to in the womb, permanently wire your brain. It sounds like these two concepts are basically universes apart, right? Well, get ready because this is going to blow your mind.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the astrological sanctuary, the biology of time, elements of the brain, planets as neurosystems, and finally, your neurosymbolic blueprint.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the astrological sanctuary. If you look at an astrological birth chart, it's divided into 12 houses, and each one represents a different slice of life. The fourth house sits right there at the very bottom of the chart. It's often beautifully called the astrological womb. It's all about our roots, our family, our ancestral history, and our absolute innermost emotional sanctuary. Think of it as your personal heartland, It provides the foundational safety net for your private self. Without a really strong, secure fourth house, stepping out to conquer the rest of the world is, well, it's incredibly tough.
When we break down its core themes, foundations and security, family and ancestry, the private self, and domestic harmony, it becomes pretty clear that the fourth house is diving into our psychological depths. We're talking about childhood wounds, relationships with primary caregivers, and really importantly, your ability to set healthy emotional boundaries as an adult. It's essentially the blueprint for how you self-regulate and self-soothe behind closed doors. And naturally, a house this profoundly sensitive is ruled by the moon and the zodiac sign of Cancer. The moon brings this incredibly soft, mothering energy governing our emotional satisfaction and that deep, primal need for a serene, sweet space to retreat to. It's basically the ultimate symbol of nurturing. But I want you to hold on to this idea of the moon and the early childhood environment, because we're about to look at this exact same concept through a completely different lens. Which brings us to Section 2, the biology of time. Before we get into the hard data, I have to share this absolutely incredible quote. Back in a 1911 letter to Sigmund Freud, the legendary Carl Jung wrote, "We shall one day discover in astrology a good deal of knowledge that has been intuitively projected into the heavens." Jung didn't look at astrology as just magic. He saw it as an intuitive projection of internal, biological, and psychological truths. Truths that humanity just didn't have the scientific vocabulary to explain yet. And, as it turns out, Jung hit the nail right on the head. This data perfectly illustrates what Jung was talking about. We now have over 3 decades of peer-reviewed medical data showing that the timing of your birth physically impacts neurodevelopment. Literally. For example, winter births actually show a higher risk of schizophrenia, and that's linked to low maternal vitamin D and disrupted sleep hormone cycles while still in the womb. On the flip side, spring births show a higher prevalence of ADHD, which points to changes in how the brain processes dopamine and reward, all due to shifting light exposure. The season you are born in literally wires your brain. So the crucial takeaway here is this. The so-called magic of the stars is actually chrononeuroendocrinology. Yeah, I know that is a massive word, but it's just the science of how time, the brain, and hormones all interact. Our ancient ancestors noticed these real seasonal differences in human temperament, but, lacking modern science, they blame the constellations instead of prenatal fluctuations in melatonin and serotonin. Let's move on to Section 3, elements of the brain. Now, let's look at how this builds a converging bridge between these two worlds. The ancients categorized personalities into 4 elements, what Galen later called temperaments. Well, medical researchers today map these exactly onto dominant neurochemical loops. It's fascinating. Fire signs, the choleric temperament, are driven by dopaminergic systems. They're all about reward-seeking and assertiveness. Earth signs are melancholic, seeking stability, which perfectly aligns with serotoninergic regulation. Air signs are sanguine, relying on acetylcholine for cognitive flexibility. And water signs are phlegmatic, mapping beautifully right onto oxytocin and limbic tuning for emotional bonding. And what is absolutely wild about this is that these elemental temperaments don't just show up in our behavior. They can actually influence physical morphology over time. Think about it.
High dopaminergic arousal, the fire element, can amplify angularity and facial tension in your muscles just from being in a constant state of action readiness. Contrast that with the water element, which is driven by oxytocin-limbic bonding. That sustained state of empathy and emotional regulation actually reflects in softer facial affect, rounder contours, and lower muscle tone. The psychological state literally sculpts the physical form. How crazy is that?
All right, Section 4. Planets as neural systems. I want to pause and highlight that we aren't just making wild guesses here. This incredible mapping framework comes straight from an open-access medical neuroscience journal examining biophysical resonance. Modern researchers are looking at astrology not as mysticism, but as a culturally derived system that basically encoded complex biopsychological synchronizations way before we ever had functional MRIs. Let's look at what we can call the planets in your head. In astrology, Mars is the god of war. In neuroscience, Mars perfectly maps to the dopaminergic aggression circuits in the striatum. Venus governs beauty and love. Neurologically, that's the orbitofrontal cortex handling aesthetic valuation and bonding. Mercury represents communication, which maps exactly to our language processing regions, like Broca's area. And the moon brilliantly mirrors the HPA axis, our core's stress response system, that modulates our attachment and our fundamental need for safety.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, your neurosymbolic blueprint. So we started all of this by talking about the astrological fourth house, the need to create a serene sanctuary, to honor your roots, and to address those childhood wounds to find emotional safety. From a hardcore neuroscience perspective, this is fundamentally the exact same thing as regulating your hippocampus and mastering vagal feedback to maintain emotional homeostasis. Seriously, whether you're lighting candles and doing a tiny ritual for your Cancer moon, or you're actively down-regulating your nervous system through breathwork, you are performing the exact same act of profound self-care. And hey, if you think this is all just fluff, consider this surprising little historical fact. J.P. Morgan famously quipped, "Millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do." High-stakes decision-makers throughout history, from top-tier financiers to fashion icons, have continuously used this symbolic architecture to interpret human temperament and the timing of cycles. They completely recognize the utility of this pattern recognition system, even if they didn't know the precise neurobiology working behind the scenes. So how do we actually honor our own blueprint? Well, here are 4 practical steps. First, acknowledge your early imprinting. Honestly, whether you call that your birth chart or your perinatal light exposure, it doesn't matter, just recognize it. Second, build a safe emotional space, a physical sanctuary that genuinely meets your needs. Third, actively address those childhood wounds and family dynamics. And fourth, regulate your nervous system. By doing all this, you are honoring both the ancient wisdom of your fourth house and the modern biological demands of your brain. Which leaves us with one final, really profound question to ponder today. Are we just reading the stars, or have the stars always simply been a mirror, intuitively reflecting the magnificent, complex biology inside every single one of us? I really hope this explainer has given you a whole new way to think about how you're wired. Keep learning, keep structuring your knowledge, and I will see you next time.